I've been wanting to do a series like this for a long time now, because after playing this game for so long, there's a lot of general knowledge that I think I take for granted, but I'm often getting asked about either on stream or in a YouTube comment section. Questions like, when should I use defensives, or how does this type of mitigation work, or how do I play around this certain affix? Definitely all great questions, and that's what I'm planning to answer in this series. So lo and behold, tanking for dummies. In this episode, we're going to explore the main mitigation of the Brewmaster Monk, Stagger. We're going to dive into how it works, the pros and cons of it, and of course, some tips to make you a better martial artist. So let's dive in. First, let's define what Stagger is. Stagger is a passive ability and is the Brewmaster's primary form of mitigation. In our spellbook, it reads as such. You shrug off attacks, delaying a portion of physical damage based on your agility, instead taking it over 10 seconds. Affects magical attacks at 45% effectiveness. So I want to break this down into three main parts. So first, how does it work? Secondly, how does it scale? And lastly, its relation to magic damage. We're then going to go over some tips, as well as talk about some of the more complicated aspects like Purifying Brew and Celestial Brew. Stagger is a very cool mechanic because unlike all of the other tanks, the Brewmaster turns what they would normally take as damage up front, and they translate it into a damage over time effect. Before I get into how we will deal with Stagger, I want to talk about the effectiveness of Stagger. While this is a very powerful passive, the player must be aware of how the damage over time effect is going to affect their player, and how they can prevent the damage from getting them killed. There is another component in the Brewmaster's kit which is going to work in conjunction with Stagger that is extremely overpowered, and that's a passive called Shuffle. Now Shuffle works as such. Nizao's teachings allow you to shuffle during combat, increasing the effectiveness of your Stagger by 100%. Shuffle is granted by attacking enemies with your Keg Smash, Blackout Kick, and Spinning Crane Kick. While Shuffle might seem like a lot, it's generally all passive. This means that both Stagger and Shuffle are going to work without really you having to think much about it. The idea is that as long as you are active during combat and using your offensive abilities like Blackout Kick and Keg Smash, your Stagger will delay roughly double the amount. Now let's talk about the damage over time effect of Stagger, and this is going to be important to know later. There are three levels of Stagger. You have Light Stagger, which is green, Moderate Stagger, which is yellow, and of course Heavy Stagger, which is red. The determined level of the damage of the dot is actually calculated based on the player's max health. Light Stagger is when the delayed damage is less than 30% of your max health, meaning that if you let the dot completely tick out, you'll lose 30% of your max health. Moderate Stagger is between 30 and 59%, and Heavy Stagger, as you may have guessed, is 60% and above. We will deal with these different types of Stagger with our Purifying Brew, but I'm going to get into that in a couple seconds. Let's get into the scaling of Stagger first though. Now, assuming that we're level 70, Stagger's baseline value will be roughly 17%, meaning that 17% of all your incoming damage will be delayed over 10 seconds. And luckily, this modifier scales with agility. That means that the higher item level we are, the more effective Stagger will become. You can actually check what your Stagger effectiveness is in your character page. My Monk, for example, is item level 414. So my Stagger effectiveness is climbing all the way up to 40%, meaning that 40% of the damage that I'm going to be taking will be delayed over 10 seconds instead. But wait, there's more. Because of Shuffle, this should theoretically double while the buff is active. Now, sadly that won't be the case because there is a diminishing return on Stagger's effectiveness. We can assume that this is an effect because eventually the Brewmaster would just be able to delay 100% of the damage they would take over time, which we can all agree would be, for a lack of better terms, busted as fuck. Anyways, this is why agility is going to be our priority over all other stats. Now, let's remember that Stagger is most effective against physical damage. This will most likely include melee hits along with some other abilities that are categorized as physical damage. You can think of Himdall's Horn of Valor and Halls of Valor as an example. Magic damage will be staggered as well, but only at 45% effectiveness. This has always been Brewmaster's weak spot, but luckily this was recently buffed in recent weeks. But with lower effectiveness against magical damage and our below average health pool, we are fairly susceptible to this type of damage. Alright, now that we've gone over how Stagger operates, let's talk about Purifying Brew and minimizing damage, and this is going to come through an ability called Purifying Brew. The first thing that Purifying Brew does is it clears 50% of delayed damage from Stagger. Simple enough, right? Now this becomes way more complicated once you add in talent choices. The main talent that is common in all builds is Improved Celestial Brew. What this does is every time you clear your Stagger, you're going to gain a stack of Purified Chi, which will increase the size of your next Celestial Brew. This stacks all the way up to 10, meaning that your next Celestial Brew will gain an additional 20% absorption value per stack. Now the amount of stacks you're going to gain from Purified Chi depends on your current level of Stagger when you purify it. I went over this in my Brewmaster guide a couple weeks ago, but I want to cover it again here. If you're currently in Green Stagger and you press Purifying Brew, you're going to gain 1 stack of Purified Chi. If you're in Yellow Stagger, also known as Moderate Stagger, you'll gain 2 stacks, and of course, if you're a mathematician, Red Stagger will grant you 3. Basically, your goal is to buff all of your Celestial Brews as much as you possibly can, and this can typically be done while your Celestial Brew is currently on cooldown, so by the time it is available again, your Celestial Brew will be amplified by at least 80%, which is 4 stacks of Purified Chi. This is the main ebb and flow of your mitigation. You're going to purify some of the damage that you take, you're going to then use Celestial Brew to stabilize your health pool, and then you're going to purify again to build stacks for your next Celestial Brew once it comes off of cooldown. And I want to quickly get real for a second and give you guys a tip. And this is a big mistake whenever I review new Brewmasters gameplay, or on the rare occasion when I'm not tanking a key and I end up playing with a Brewmaster player. Purifying Brew, especially when you're playing with Improved Celestial Brew talent, should be used often. You want to get into the habit of never sitting on a charge, meaning that even if you are sitting in Green Stagger, especially in lower level keys or content, Purifying Brew will still grant you a stack of Purified Chi, and between each Celestial Brew use, you should pretty easily be able to build up at least 3 to 4 stacks of Purified Chi. This will lower the damage that you take and increase your healing significantly, both in lower level content and higher content alike. It seems that a lot of Brewmaster players try to optimize their Stagger and Purifying Brew, and they end up sitting on charges. And this is honestly, in my opinion, a pretty unhealthy practice. Optimizing this type of usage really doesn't become important until you're doing higher level content. Now, of course, with this is a massive disclaimer. If you're running talents like High Tolerance, for example, there is a slightly more nuanced playstyle to Purifying Brew, but it's really not something that you need to worry about. More often than not, minimizing your damage intake while improving your self-healing through consistent use of Purifying Brew and Celestial Brew is way more important than the extra haste you're going to gain. Anyways, I think that covers it, and I hope this answers anyone's questions about how Stagger works. If you have any questions, of course, feel free to comment below, leave a like, and I'll love you forever. I do want to say I want to continue this series, so I'm always open for suggestions for any little tank tips that I can provide you guys. I hope you're all staying happy, healthy, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.